Let's get started. Hello, and thank you so much for coming to LSU and with us.
Thank you, Gabby. Great
and
to
for
be
your
here.
interest in this position. We have lots and lots of questions for you, and I'll take my last
Okay.
those questions.
Sure.
And we have a very diverse panelists to ask these questions. So what we will do is go one panelist at a time,
Okay.
answering the questions, and we take 10 minutes or less for each Q&A.
Okay.
We may have time later for some follow-up questions.
Sure. Okay. Good.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And we'll start first with Dr. Naveen Atsumili, Associate Professor at the LSU Agricultural Center.
Thank you, Gabby.
Howdy.
Howdy. My name is Naveen Atsumili. I'm an ag economist, and my majority appointment with the LSU Ag Center, which is one of the 9 institutions within the LSU system. And just like several other faculty within the LSU Ag Center who share a joint appointment with LSU and campus, so do I as well. These research faculty, we conduct research across more than 15 research stations that spread parts of the state. We cover agricultural crops, forestry, aquaculture, natural resource conservation, and then we work very closely with our state agencies and national agencies as well.
Right.
Then comes our bigger component, which is extension folks, who take all that research, conduct field days, farmer meetings, video conferences now, and develop these extension material. So what we would like to hear from you in your leadership through your short-term and long-term goals, how would you continue to support the Ag Center mission, and what would be your expectations of Ag Center system as well?
Yeah, good. Well, thank you so much for the great question. And the Ag Center certainly is something to be very proud of. I read a lot about it, looked at a lot of the data and so on, and there's really extraordinary stories to be told and great successes. I just say, sort of to contextualize my answer, one of the things that most attracts me about this position at LSU is the totality of the system, all of what it encompasses, all the way from the laboratory school, K-12, through 2-year, 4-year, Eunice, Alexandria, Shreveport, A&M, medical campuses, the Ag Center, Pennington, the whole 9 yards. You put that all together, it's really an extraordinary system, and really, frankly, unlike pretty much anything else I think that is in the country. So I think that is part of the reason for the successes we see, but I think also tremendous opportunities going forward. So to the first part of your question, the whole notion of extension and field stations and things, experiment stations, and in the whole land grant mission, I think is extraordinarily important. And given that agriculture is a big part of Louisiana's economy, the Ag Center is very critically important. It's certainly one of the main elements of this incredible system. So support for it, I think it's already got, I think, a good level of state support. But as you say, you leverage that very heavily with federal dollars, with other resources and support. And also, I think with the private sector, which I'd like to learn more about, but you have a lot of partnerships. I think going forward, certainly strengthening that mission is critically important because not even just in terms of food production, things like that, but food security, those kinds of issues, very, very important. Livestock production, a whole 9 yards, all of what agriculture encompasses. I think also the beauty of the land grant system and what you have here in Louisiana with an office in every parish is the fact that you have this connective tissue throughout the state, which can be extraordinarily helpful in ways in addition to agriculture. And I'd say that if you look at sort of many papers have been written on the sort of future of the land grant, the land grant in the United States, it speaks to looking at broadening that mission, not in any way forsaking what is already there. I want to be very clear on that point. This is not about changing the ag mission. Very, very critical. It needs to be strengthened. But building it out to some domains of technology, some domains of economic development, for especially the rural areas. As we build out broadband and so on, and even things like education, I think the extension framework is a very, very powerful tool to do that in ways that are really, frankly, not otherwise possible. So as LSU is certainly the enterprise is the focal point of higher education in Louisiana, along with the laboratory school, I think this is a way that it plays an absolutely unique role that no other institution or no other system could actually do. So I would say I would challenge it to look at broadening its scope into these other domains, thinking about where America is going in terms of economic development for rural areas in particular. And the key thing that you want to be to not want to see happen is, and I can say this because I'm from a rural community, is you don't want to change the DNA, or they don't want to change the DNA of their communities. They want to stay a rural community, but they want to survive. They want to be successful. They want to participate in economic growth and so on, but they don't want to be different than who they are. And I absolutely support that idea. I think the key thing is to help empower them to do things they're not now able to do beyond agriculture, and bring those elements in so they grow and they thrive, but they truly remain those wonderful communities that we love so much about rural America, which I think is coming from one. I can say I value them greatly, and I think we need to preserve. So that would be how I would respond to that. Very good question. Thank you.
Thank you for that response.
Sure.
Thank you. We hear next from a colleague on Zoom, Dr. Chris Kelvin. He's the Vice Chancellor for Research and Professor of Molecular and Cellular Physiology at the LSU Health Science Centers in Shreveport.
Right.
So thank you, Gabby, and everyone else. So my question really addresses a little bit broader scope, and I think you hit on it already. But knowing the history of LSU and knowing the wide range of talents and programs we have to offer, how do you see science and technology pursuits really fitting in or driving the future mission of LSU?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Kevin. It's great to see you again. You think about the totality of what LSU is, first and foremost, it's an educational enterprise, right? Not only creating individuals and helping build their careers and through their degree programs and things like that, but also creating the citizens tomorrow to help them understand how to be engaged, civically engaged, responsible citizens of our country. So that's really a core part of the mission. Another important key part of it is research and technology development, research and technology commercialization for the benefit of the region, the state, and the nation and the world. And that's really foundational to what a land grant university is about, but also the connected pieces of the system. All the parts of the LSU family are very much interwoven through that. And then the third piece I would say, of course, is the service mission, not only in terms of faculty service and community service. The Carnegie designation, excuse me, that LSU has, I think is really quite extraordinary. But then also the service through the agriculture activities, through the Ag Center, through the 2 hospitals, and all the great work that they do in terms of treating patients and doing research. So to me, as a researcher, where I spent most of my professional career in terms of research and research policy, the research mission of the system and of the A&M campus and all the campuses that are engaged with research is really critically important. And so doing things that we can to enhance that research, to grow the research, but not just for the sake of growth, not just for the sake of picking some number and chasing that number, but saying, what is the real value of research to our students, to undergraduate students in particular, undergraduate research, graduate students? How do we attract the best and brightest? How do we make sure that we have enough funding for graduate research assistants, and we have a good number of postdocs and so on? And looking at the rankings of LSU, various rankings out there, I think LSU has a ways to go to meet the level of an institution that it already is. So in some sense, those are lagging indicators, I believe, in research as well, that really speak to unrealized potential. And so in no way am I being critical. I'm just saying that I see potential yet to be realized and opportunities that we could seize in a variety of ways that we could certainly talk about if you'd like to.
Thank you. Next, and changing gears a bit, we hear from
Sure.
Professor Suzanne Marchand. She's a Boyd professor at the LSU department.
Great.
So really changing gears.
Oh, fantastic.
I'm here to represent colleagues from not only humanities and social sciences, but art, music, math, comm,
Right.
all the rest of the university. So first of all, I have a philosophical question, and then I have a follow-up.
Okay.
My philosophical question is, must research always be useful? You'll understand there are layers and layers. Of
Right, sure.
And then the second part of the question is, I understand you're a science guy. I love science guys. Many of you science guys and gals in the rooms are considered friends. But I'm a little concerned that if we have a science guy as president, it will reinforce a perception that the only serious research going on at LSU is in the science.
Yep.
And there's nothing else.
Yep.
And the rest of us are teaching drones.
Right.
So would you please speak to that?
Sure.
And how you would support and promote other kinds of.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and thank you for asking it. And the main thing I can do is offer up a very practical, verifiable track record in that regard. So when I became VPR, for example, one of the things that I put upon myself as a personal goal was to convince those who are in the arts, the fine arts, the humanities, the social sciences, that in fact I was supportive of their scholarly activities, even though, for example, a lot of them didn't bring in a lot of money. But it's not about money. It's not about research. It's about scholarly activities. Some people consider themselves researchers. Some people don't. Everyone is a scholar. And so that's the term that I use. And it took me a couple of years to basically win the trust of those individuals through actions that I took as VPR to create fellowship opportunities that when they would go after, say, a Fulbright or something like that, we would give them support. We would encourage them to do that. That didn't always happen because sometimes it meant taking time away from classes or whatever. They're teaching 3+3 or whatever. And we said, no, we've got to really help them. We had a whole arts and humanity, fine arts and humanities focal point in our strategic planning. And so I went around, talked to all the faculty and said, what we need most of all is time. We need time. And so we changed the research council program that we have, which is the internal funding mechanism, to allow those folks to get release time from teaching in the arts and fine arts and humanities, even though they weren't pursuing external funding. And that was different. That was a huge change. It was like, well, we'll give you funding if you're going to go after external funding. Well, we said, okay, some of you will, some of you won't. We want to encourage you to do that because it will help build your scholarly program. But if you need funding for summer or whatever, we will provide the support on a competitive basis. After a while, people in those disciplines began to realize that I was true to my word, that I didn't just want to throw money at them, but I truly, in my heart, valued them as scholars, not because they linked with engineering or the sciences, but because they did scholarship in art history, in fine arts, in music, in productions, theater, so on and so forth, that was fundamental to a comprehensive research university. And that word comprehensive to me means something. And it means that everybody is valued equally. We've got to resource folks. So that's one example of a thing. They also created awards for faculty. And some people wanted to say, okay, create awards over here for arts and humanities. Well, say for arts, fine arts, here for humanities. I said, no, we're not going to do that. I want an art historian standing up there with a theater major standing right next to an electrical engineering major, all winning the same award. Because that way, it's not like, well, you won the arts award, and that's pretty easy to get compared to me being a scientist. I didn't want that kind of stuff going on, so we didn't go there. So those are some of the ways, very tangible ways that I said we're going to create a structure where I can convince you that I value your scholarship, and we're going to resource you in a way that is appropriate. I also developed an online course called Demystifying the Academic Research Enterprise. It's for all the things that people who do scholarship in the academic enterprise, you never really learn except through experience. So, how do I get funding? What does a competitive grant proposal look like? How are funding targets set? How do I, how do private foundations work, say, versus federal agencies? How do I build and work in teams? What is peer review? How do I communicate my scholarly activities and so on and so forth? And I designed it for all disciplines. So if you actually go online and look at it, a lot of the promo videos, they're very artistically heavy. And in fact, the folks that are signed up for that course in the second part of the fall term, none of them are in STEM fields. And I love that. In fact, one of them is a music major. Another one is I think an art history major. And so I kind of put my money where my mouth is. It's easy to say I value them, but unless you truly do and you support them, and I've testified before Congress of the value of the National Institutes for the Arts, National Institutes for the Humanities, and all these kinds of disciplines, and also the social sciences and the behavioral sciences, which oftentimes sort of feel marginalized, and English and so on and so forth. Very, very critically important. So I've done that intentionally not because I had to or somebody said you should do that because it'll make you more attractive, whatever. It's because it's the right thing to do. We're all scholars, and we all belong in that arena of scholarship. So I'm glad you put that on the table because I feel very strongly about it. I've worked very hard to build a reputation where folks know that I support them genuinely.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. Next, we go back to Zoom. Dr. Patricia Molina, she's the professor of physiology and director of the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Center of Excellence at LSU Health Science Center of New Orleans.
Good afternoon, Dr. Droegemeier.
Hi. Good afternoon.
How are you?
Good. Thank you very much. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. So as president of LSU, you would oversee the academic, the athletic, and the financial aspects of the university. However, as it appears you are very well aware, it is the research enterprise that drives the reputation of an academic institution. You've served as vice president for research at University of Oklahoma. What have been your most important achievements in growing the research enterprise during that time? And how will your learned experiences inform your vision for maximizing LSU's research infrastructure and supporting the growth of research?
Yeah, good. Well, thank you very much. It's a great question. So I'll focus on it to your point about being VPR. So when I first came into that position, I looked at the office and I said, we're not sized anywhere close to what we need to be in order to grow the research enterprise. We clearly were under-resourced in basically every area. So I had one of the staff members go out and copy the org charts off of about, 10 different universities. And you should have seen the look on their faces. They're like, my God, I can't believe that we were operating the way we were. And the whole point is you can't set a growth target or a goal and then not build the infrastructure that's needed to necessary to actually support that capability. One of the other things that I did was I created a research statistics and analysis group to look at a lot of data to really understand how we were performing, to be able to help faculty if they were falling on hard times and nobody was paying attention to them, that we could see this happening and saying, okay, what can we do to be helpful? And one of the most important things I think that we did was create a center called the Center for Research Program Development and Enrichment that helped faculty understand not just how to write competitive grant proposals and build teams and things like that, but to think about their career trajectory. And it was very much a personalized service, almost like a physician-patient relationship, where we had faculty would come in and we talked to them. And it was stuff that they didn't necessarily want to tell their dean or their chair or their director, and certainly not the provost, of like, I don't exactly know where I'm going. I don't know what the next step is. So we would provide this sort of discussion and counseling and help them figure out not just how to write the next grant proposal or go after the next Fulbright or whatever, but to say, okay, where are you going and where are you at now and how can we help you build your career path? And one of the important points I wanted to make with regard to the answer I just gave with regard to the arts, fine arts, and humanities, we provide, this is not just for the people that bring in money. In fact, we put a great emphasis on the arts, fine arts, and humanities. One of the people in that organization had a PhD in poetry. So he really did extremely well to those folks. And it was very clear that we were investing resources to help them be successful as well. So that's another tangible kind of investment. Another thing we did a little bit more down to the kind of the nuts and bolts was we created a radar strategic initiative in 2003. And we said, okay, what is one of our strongest programs that we could really invest in strategically and grow over a period of 10 years where we could really just kind of own that area, frankly, in the world. We wanted to become absolutely world class because we had a history of that over the past 40, 50 years. And that was sort of the beginnings of the program that we had in meteorology. Radar was a big part of that. So we had a strategic initiative and we hired cluster faculty, cluster hires, brought in staff, and they are now absolutely setting the world on fire. They're world renowned. The DoD is providing enormous amounts of money to them, and they're making a big difference, educating a huge number of students at the intersection of electrical engineering and meteorology. We've got a very unique program there. And that's a huge success story. And their expenditures went through the roof. And now they've got something like 20 engineers, 20 full-time engineers. And some of these people could be at major private companies, but they choose to be at the university because it's a very exciting, freewheeling, intellectually stimulating environment. We achieved Carnegie R1 status when I was VPR. I did a strategic planning effort. I created an initiative I called Defense Security and Intelligence, DSI. We were not doing anywhere close to what we could have been doing in the DoD space or security and intelligence. We increased our expenditures. I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, but something like 350% over 4 years, simply by helping faculty understand that going after those kinds of support frames, for example, that are not NSF, not NASA, not NOAA, not NIH, but it's the mission agencies in the DoD and the security space, requires a completely different approach. And a lot of faculty didn't know that, they didn't know how to do it. So we resourced them. We provided the support to do that. And they've been wildly successful. One woman who was in the later stages of her career had never been funded in anything other than NIH. And she went to the Army. She's an expert in hearing and in concussive blasts. And so she had models with animals, but also computational models. She started getting funding from the military, and they said, how fast can you grow your program? We want to fund you more. It's not about the money. It's about how you can contribute to the scholarly pursuits of the institution and to the nation. So those are just some examples. Working in classified research, we started an Office of Undergraduate Research, which we didn't have. And so those are the kinds of things that I've had a lot of experience doing and building teams. I actually started a kind of an ad hoc effort from the Dakotas all the way to the Gulf Coast of vice presidents and vice chancellors for research. It was over 24, 25 institutions. It was kind of a grassroots effort to say, in the Midwest, what kind of common problems can we work on together that are beyond what a given one or two institutions can do? We have the Ogallala Aquifer in the Midwest. We have a lot of major private companies there that are ag-based, and they've got some other capabilities and things. We have a substantial congressional delegation, but we're sort of forgotten. So we said, let's just create this. And LSU was a big part of that. And so it was just one of those things I felt needed to be done. And so I led the effort. It took a lot of time, but it was worth doing. And we started building, kind of spreadsheets of what our challenges were, what our capabilities were. And we began to understand and build linkages across our institutions of what we could do and how we could work together. So those are just some of the things that I did as vice president for research in the 9 years that I was in that position. We advanced the research enterprise all across the university in the process. But of course, it wasn't just a one-man show, right? I had a lot of folks working with me, and we really changed the culture of the institution to where research was now much more front and center than it had been before.
Thank you very much for that very extensive answer. I'm just going to ask you for a very short follow-up. Are there any specific research areas that you believe should be expanded at LSU? I mean, it sounds like you know pretty much what goes on here.
I do, but I know enough to say that without being at an institution, it's really hard to know that completely. And one of the things that I do, is just how I'm wired together, is I'm very collaborative. I want to get a lot of voices at the table. It's not a decision that a president ought to make in isolation. You need to talk to all the folks. You need to talk to the students. You need to talk to the faculty. Say, okay, what are our strengths? Kind of do the same analysis that we did for all the different states and all the different institutions that were part of that Midwest group that I mentioned. And say, okay, what are our historical strengths? Obviously, coast and environment is a big area. And a lot of the work with sea level rise and some of the challenges there, I think we're already doing really, really great things there. But is there work beyond that? One of the points I've been making in my other meetings is basically to say, universities say lots of the same things, right? We want to improve health. We want to improve the human condition. You know, I like those statements, but they don't mean a whole lot. If you look at what LSU is going to do and the big ideas that we ought to be pursuing, it ought to be unmistakably identified with LSU. When you read the statement, you say, oh yeah, that's LSU, they do that. Now, it's not always the case, but I think we need to really look hard at what our core strengths are, what our historical strengths are, and where we ought to be strategically investing, and let that rising tide lift a lot of boats. When we did the Radar Strategic Initiative, there were a lot of folks in the various programs that said, well, why don't we do computer modeling of weather? Why don't we do surface-based mesonetworks? Why don't we do process studies? And we all agreed that radar was the right one, because if we could be successful in that, it would mean resources for the entire program. That's exactly what happened. So you have to get people aligned and take them out of their own sort of narrow interest, their own selfish interest, to say, let's talk about the good of the institution, the good of the state, and your success will come along with that. We're not leaving you behind, but we can't do everything all at one time. We have to focus and be strategic. So that's a conversation that I would want to have with all of my colleagues here at the institution.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And again, maybe that was a nice segue. Here's from Dr. Nancy Rabelais.
Yes.
She's from the LSU School of Environment and Natural Academy Science.
Speaking of rising tide,
Not red tides, right? Rising tides. Could be red tides, right?
Say, I'm sure everybody's told you. Mistake. But we do have some problems related to environmental issues.
Right.
Mississippi River and full water quality. Top exhaustion, dominant one. Well, there's a lot going on with the river right now. It turned out people bad. But coastal land loss, wetland restoration.
Right.
Those are big issues of the state. And there's too many disparate points of access to try to solve that problem or work on the problem. And there's not a good coordination of those things. And I see some of it is not being transparent and some not very sound science being behind resource management. So could you address how you could see LSU and not just LSU? Departments within LSU and outside of LSU addressing these.
Yeah, no, it's a really great point. It's exactly the thing I was saying before, that one of the beautiful things about LSU in particular is you have the Ag Center, you have the Coast and the Environment College, you have folks that do work in biology, marine biology, and all these different areas. And the question is, are we having 1,000 flowers that are blooming everywhere and they're getting about yay tall? Are we doing this? Are we planting beautiful gardens where things are growing tall, but they're not fields and fields where, I mean, that scholarship has to happen, but if we focus our resources, we could really tackle substantial challenging problems that have a long time horizon. These river problems you're mentioning, they're not something we're going to understand in 3 or 5 years, right? They're kind of decadal or more timescale problems. So really defining what those are and then bringing the appropriate elements together to address them. And I've done that a lot in research centers where it's across disciplines, where we say, we've got to help people understand what is our goal, what are we trying to achieve here, and that you're not giving up your own scholarly endeavors. In fact, it's going to help each of your individual careers move forward, but we're all working together toward a broader goal that's beyond your own particular area, where you're feeding into a bigger set of goals or a bigger goal that is sort of over here. It's going to have a major impact. And that typically will catalyze other disciplines coming in, other points of view, and so on, where people learn from it. I kind of like to say it's like the rays of a lens going to the focal point, that all these different pieces are coming together. But one of the important things is to have a clear sense of, okay, what does a focal point look like? What is it we're trying to do here? And how do I know what my particular part of that is, which advances my career, but also advances the good of all. And so I think it's getting people to see that bigger picture, but to see their own scholarly activities and successes in the context of these other things, not exclusively, but as part of what they're doing.
As a follow-on to big picture.
Yep.
Many of the restoration activities, I mean, they're thinking 20, 30 years. And global change, especially climate change,
Right.
requires that we think long.
Mhm.
That. How can you see LSU being involved or proactive for the future of our grandchildren?
Yep.
Sorts of activities.
Right. So this maybe at least partly answer that. One answer is, what I've been talking about is the fact that LSU has a 5-year strategic plan, 2020 to 2025. I'm arguing that we need a quarter century plan for LSU, and because things that happen on a longer time scale, you don't see them, you don't pay attention to them on a 5-year time scale or even a decadal time scale. If you look at 25, 30 years, I'm not saying 25 years is a magic number, but you look at a few decades, you start to see trends in demographics, you start to see trends in natural resources. You see things that will help you make decisions right now in terms of where you're going as an institution, even though presidents and chancellors and provosts, they come and go, but the institution lives on. And we can't act as though the institution every 5 years will have a new strategic plan that gives a whole bunch of different ideas. If we have a broad arc of a 25 or 30 plan that looks at these kinds of long-term things, then we can make commitments up front to say it's going to take us 20, 30 years to unravel that. But on a 5-year time scale, no one would ever believe you that that's true. So I think that's got to be a much longer, and every meeting I've been having here, I've mentioned this point of a long-term plan, and nobody yet has said it's a dumb idea. And if it is, we ought to, toss it out the window and forget it. But to have a meteorologist say we need a 30-year outlook, well, right, I mean, it's kind of, if storms are coming, I don't even know where they're going to get here today. But I do think that gets to your question, Nancy, a lot of these longer term things. And frankly, we as a country, we look at the next budget cycle, the next congressional election, whatever. And, LSU, again, they don't have to be like the rest of the country. Let's swim against the flow. Let's do something different. And other people say, that's a great idea. We're following, what's it called? Oh, it's the LSU model. How cool would that be? That would be pretty neat. Yeah, sure.
Thank you. We'll go back to Zoom now to hear from Professor Eric Rahusin, who's also Boyd Professor of Diabetes and Metabolism at Medical Biomedical.
Good afternoon, Dr. Droegemeier.
Hi, good afternoon.
You can imagine by my accent that I'm not from here, but I was asked to come by the director of NIDDK to build a special biomedical apparatus at NIH. And then I said 2 years maximum. I stayed 14 years at NIH, went to Eli Lilly, and joined the Pennington Biomedical Research Center because it was an inspiration to me. It was research and only research on obesity and its associated disease. And God, if I was right to choose this path, because as you know, it's really a big problem. In a few words, Pennington, it's 60 faculty, 25 postdocs, 250 staff, 65 million of budget. Now almost again 20 million from the state, but all the rest from contract and grants and no tuition. Now I have two general questions. The first one is for Louisiana to transition to a knowledge-based economy, positioning LSU as a true, and I insist, a true level 1 research university will be paramount. After reading your cover letter and your CV, I know that you agree with this. But now to achieve that, what will be your specific goal for the administration at LSU? How will implement that? Will you hire a research czar, basically, to guide this agenda to become a really not 78th or 79th in the nation in research, but to be among the 20 top?
Right. It's a really great question. And I think, first of all, I would say everyone I've met here in terms of leadership is really, really top notch. And I think they've got great vision, but they're not afraid to point out some of the challenges that LSU faces. To your point about a knowledge-based economy, I think, Louisiana, like Oklahoma, traditionally has been oil and gas. It's been agriculture. It's got some of the same challenges in terms of incarceration and drug abuse and so on and so forth. It also has a military presence, some aerospace and so on. But this gets back to the point about the Ag Center and the extension program of really thinking about the state as a knowledge-based economy. There is a meeting happening literally right now, I believe. I think they call it the Group of 100. That one of the Wayne Brown, who's on the board of supervisors, was going to, and he told me, he says, where Governor Bell Edwards comes, all these people come, we talk about where the economy is going in Louisiana. And the Louisiana LSU system really has to be, and they are certainly in that conversation, and needs to be a strong driver. Well, how are you a strong driver among many, many institutions? You're a strong driver by engaging at the state level with the legislature and the governor very strongly through state and federal relations, but the state relations. That's very important. Also through the Ag Center, saying we are strengthening the ag mission of the Ag Center and the extension program and the research activities, the experiment station, and so on. But we're also building that out. We're taking that extraordinary connective tissue to all the parishes, and we're going to use that as a way to really bring a new economy, or a new dimension of the economy, I should say, to Louisiana. And that's frankly something, as I said earlier, that I think really LSU is uniquely positioned to do, and perhaps is the only one that can do it, because I think it's hard to turn the ship. And I think for a lot of political reasons, so on, it's difficult for others to really start to talk about economic diversification. We had this conversation last night. So I think a research university that has the power and the reach and the extraordinary breadth from K-12 all the way through doctoral programs and medical and ag is really well positioned to do that. So I think it's a really a great opportunity to do that for the state. It's not going to be easy, but I think everything is in place to do exactly what you're talking about. And it really depends upon, of course, having a very robust research enterprise across the entire system. And frankly, like I said before, I think there's a lot of unrealized potential here. A lot of great things happening for sure, but a lot of work that could be done that would really underpin the kind of thing we're talking about.
Thank you. And my second question is more related to biomedical research. And you mentioned that everybody wants to live well and longer and healthier. Now in the South, and you were talking about LSU having something special, which is not some of the same. I think we have this problem of health disparity. And there's no question, you take COVID-19, for example, you saw the data with diabetes, with obesity and all that. I mean, much more death among this population, African-American, more targeted, Native Americans, and so on. And my question is, how do we position LSU when it comes to LSU Health Science Center, Shreveport, and New Orleans and Pennington to be at the forefront when it comes to research in health disparity? Because we have the means from the NIH, because there are many grants for that, but sometimes, we don't have for example, the talent. We don't have among our faculty enough underrepresented minorities. How would you tackle that?
Absolutely. Well, I think all the organizations that you mentioned, they all have their own important identities, and rightly so. But I think as I've talked to people, there needs to be a stronger culture of working together. Like, for example, to get NCI designation for a cancer center. So I think that's extremely important. These health disparities you talk about, very much the same as we have in Oklahoma. So how do you do it? You're right. You've got to have talent. You have to have the capability of people to go after funding. Of course, that takes the talent, but it's maybe other resources to put seed funding in place to do early experimentation, which the university needs to invest in. Having the appropriate facilities are obviously extremely important. And I think here with Pennington and all the other things that you mentioned, they do have that. But I think there's also a great opportunity for philanthropy here. In Oklahoma, we have the Harold Ham Diabetes Center. We have the Dean McGee Eye Institute. So there are a lot of these things that the donors who have personal connections to some of these health maladies are very passionate about making sure that in the state of Oklahoma, we are able to take care of those populations. And then certainly we have Native American health disparities, diabetes, very, very big deal. So I think you say, okay, if this is a focal point for us, and it's, again, a big idea that LSU says, we're going to do this, we're going to go capture this, we're going to do it in this particular way to leverage our strengths, then you help donors be a part of that conversation from the very beginning. And I'm not saying that the philanthropic part is the only way to go about it. You're absolutely right. You got to have NIH, you got to have a lot of R01s, you get COBRAs, you leverage the IDEA program in Louisiana. You put that all together and you create a strategy that allows you to go after that and be successful. But it takes everybody coming together. If everybody's doing their own thing, that division will never give you the critical mass you need to actually achieve the goal that you're talking. And so this coming together is what I've kind of done my whole career. How do we bring people together, see that common goal, see that common vision, and convince them that they can trust one another, that we're not going to be stealing resources from each other to actually make this happen. And I'll just be openly candid with you. That's a lot of times the fear, and it's not unique to any given institution. It's just the human nature.
Thank you. And I love your sentence. The future path for LSU should ensure it is not simply one of many, but rather one to which many turn for inspiration.
I absolutely, in my heart of hearts, believe that is true and believe it could happen. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Next, we have Professor Isaiah Warner, a Boyd professor, an LSU Boyd professor at the Department of Chemistry.
Great.
Okay.
Oh, you're here. Okay.
As I near retirement, not too far off in the future, I started to assess my research group, my output, and all of that. As a board professor, I've had close to 400 publications.
Wow.
Brought in more than $50 million grant fund. That's only counting PI and co-PI.
Wow.
Count the other grants up in it. And I'm convinced that my success is attributed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, more than inclusion. More than half of my students have been women, more than a third have been underrepresented minorities. And I'm wondering, do you agree that diversity, equity, and inclusion is an important component of research?
Oh, absolutely.
Like you described.
100%. And in fact, when I read the 2-year roadmap, with kudos to the folks that put that together, it's very important. I didn't see anything about research in it. And I think that was something that needs to be added, because research, there's so many opportunities to build equity and diversity inclusion as part of the research process, because fundamentally, to your point, and congratulations on your career, it's incredible. Research is where we bring folks together from all over the place to solve problems. It's where people are respected regardless of their viewpoints, regardless of anything. If that's not happening, well, then we're missing the point about research, because it's not the kind of environment that we want, which is really fundamental to the ethos of research about honesty and integrity and respect and that sort of thing. And that's where I think we can address some of these challenges, because the research enterprise reflects those deeply held values. It doesn't matter where you come from, what you look like, research is where you're welcome, unless you do bad things, and then we don't want you there. But it is the ultimate bringer together, I think, gatherer of talent. So it's very interesting to hear you say that. I'm not only a strong supporter of it, I've worked my whole life, my whole career, rather, my professional career on these kinds of things, both at the White House and as a VPR, hiring an individual at my university as the director of broader impacts in research, which had a huge diversity component in it. Not to have people just simply do research on diversity, but how do I actually, recruit a diverse student population? How do I, meet the needs of the grant that require diversity and the things like that? Not just to check a box, but to do it in a meaningful way, reaching out to Native American populations, to actually bring people in, not just move them around, because that's not increasing diversity, bringing them into the system. So I think research is an extraordinary way to do that, because that's where you get the pipeline, coming in. So I couldn't agree with you. Absolutely right.
And do you have any particular plans as to how? I am also co-chairing diversity, equity, and inclusion program for increasing our faculty. We increase diversity to some extent among the student body, not that
right.
But certainly we are probably going in the negative direction with regard to fact. How can we increase the diversity among our faculty? Do you have ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. And we had this conversation with the faculty and the staff senate this morning about the student diversity is pretty good. I mean, you can always do better, but it's compared to a lot of universities, it's really quite good. The faculty is way, way below that. So I think there are a variety of ways. To me, I'd say, again, not knowing the things that have been done, to me, it's a presidential priority. Title IX, President's Office. Diversity, equity, inclusion, President's Office. Those are things that I value, that I think are extremely important to the culture of the institution, the future of the country, the future of our entire nation, and all of what makes us who we are. And I don't know exactly what the reporting lines are now. I think the provost, she's an extraordinary leader. I just been so impressed with her. So in no way am I saying that if this resides somewhere that it's failing or whatever. I'm just saying that it needs to be a presidential priority. And I've said it before, there's something we really want to make it a priority. Then we've got the president has to be aware of it, constantly message it, understand it, support it, resource it. And that's critically important. And I think diversity in the faculty ranks is critical as well. So there are lots of ways to go about it, I think. I don't think, frankly, a lot of times that we, in our recruiting activities with faculty search committees, they know really how to even create diverse pools. There've been training and things like that. My own experience is a lot of times they're just not sure. And so we need to help. There's lots of ways, lots of interventions that need to happen. But I think this is a very diverse state. The student population is really wonderfully diverse. Faculty, not so much. So we've got to fix that. We've got to fix that. So I would look to you and others to help me figure out what would work here and how it ought to be implemented and make it a priority. Absolutely.
Thank you. Well, we have time for follow-ups, but I take the prerogative as a church clerk, at least one question. And this is something that
Yep.
I know we have talked about, but haven't heard it from you today. And this is about graduate students.
Yep.
You know, that graduate students are the core, the research and scholar. What is your vision for supporting?
Yeah, if you don't have graduate students, you know, and although, you know, undergraduates are doing a lot of times doing master's level work, and that's great, but graduate students, you got to have them. So there are various you know, funding ideas on the table now in Congress to increase support for graduate fellowships and assistantships and things at places like NSF and NIH. I think one of the things that really I feel strongly about, pardon me, is partnering, leveraging dollars. So for example, if you look at private industry, a lot of interest areas that are very relevant to private industry, chemistry, ag, so on, you can say, okay, we want to look at either having industrial partnerships and fellowships that might be named, and they don't have to be endowed, just, you know, actually support it. And if say, for example, you can get a third of the grant funding from the federal government and 2/3 from private industry, you actually build the program. You could also do philanthropic giving and have endowments where you could have a co-funding through private companies who are great friends of the university, who are working in key areas there. You're endowing graduate fellowships, or at least endowing a substantial part of those, where the university through other means of support might be able to fund them. But then you always go out and try to get funding from federal agencies. So you don't ever want to rely purely on philanthropy or purely on partnerships from the private sector. You really want to have a foundation of federal grants. That's really critical. But if we're expecting the federal government to fund all this stuff, it isn't going to happen, right? So we have to be creative in leveraging dollars, which a place like Louisiana is extremely good at, because, you know, a lot of times you don't have the resources, and Oklahoma doesn't have the resources that we need, that we really would want. So we have to take the dollars we get, the ones that are available, and we have to leverage it really heavily. And this is true the arts and fine arts and humanities as well. Like I said, Fulbright fellowships and all these other kinds of programs that are out there. Sometimes it requires university match, and sometimes faculty don't want to go after it because they're afraid to ask for the funding. We have to change the culture to where, no, we want you to take a semester and do a Fulbright. We want you to go to Europe. We want you to go expand your scholarly endeavors, because that brings quality to the institution. So I think there are a lot of ways, Gabby, that we could really look at leveraging the dollars that are coming in to get more mileage out of them by stretching them, by doing partnerships and co-funding and things like that. I've pushed this very, very strongly at the federal level. I testified before the Senate Commerce Committee a few weeks ago on the Endless Frontier Act that Senator Schumer introduced. And so it proposes very substantial increases for NSF and so on. But there's nothing in there about, hey, let's partner with private companies. We have trillion-dollar companies in this country. Why are we only saying that it's taxpayer dollars that are going to fund these things? Suppose we leverage that, say 3-to-1, and all of a sudden, instead of getting, you know, 3,000 or 4,000 grad students, we get 12,000 or 15,000. Now you're talking a difference, right? And not to say again that private companies are banks, but you're leveraging the resources that they have against federal dollars. You're partnering, you're holding hands, you're partnering and saying, okay, you want us to do the basic research going to result in transformative technologies 5 to 10 years from now, quantum, AI, advanced manufacturing, and so on. You know, work with us on this, because the government should fund certain things that companies won't. Companies can do things, and private foundations can also do things that the government won't. And when you put those together, you span the entire space. Okay, but if you're only saying the government doing it, you're missing out on great opportunity to leverage funds and, frankly, to move the country forward and to give students these opportunities and fix some of the challenges we have with diversity and equity and inclusion. So many people in this country don't ever realize their dreams and opportunities because they're never given the chance through circumstances completely beyond their control. And we can't have it. That's just not America.
Thank you.
Sure.
Like I said, we have time. Yes.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I mean, you've touched on topics that are very close to what we see in broadband issues. We're not able to get to all the clientele.
Right.
So what, from your experience, what are some of the strengths as well as the opportunities that the Ag Center has that you and your team would or will leverage, so we as a system together can serve the needs of our most important customer, at least in our eyes, is the community?
Right. Oh, that's a really great question. So one of the things that I think, and this sounds so mundane and so not exciting, but it's so terribly important, and that is telling the LSU story out in every parish of the state. There are so many great things that are happening, and we can put a lot of statistics out there, like, we expended $350 million here, and we did this. We have, $3 billion of economic impact. Those are extremely important statistics. But at the end of the day, it's hard for people to translate that into where they live and work right now. A single mom with 3 kids just trying to make it work. And so how does this institution really translate its incredible work and successes into the entirety of the population of Louisiana? The Ag Center is unique in the sense that it has those touch points of those communities and those areas to help the institution figure out how to not just sell these things, but to message them in ways and actually do things that are, in fact, positively impacting the lives of those individuals. So one of the things I would say is, you've got that knowledge base, you've got that history, that connective tissue, that understanding. Help the system figure out how to be more effective in communicating, be more effective in actually doing things that are, in fact, affecting the lives in a very positive way of the citizens of Louisiana. The second thing would be, as we talked about, and you mentioned, you're so right in this, the rural broadband. There are rural broadband initiatives. When I was at the White House, the USDA actually funded a lot of connectivity and so on. This is where I think federal relations for the university are extremely important. The voice in Washington of Senator Kennedy, Senator Cassidy, very important in the House delegation as well. Really speaking a strong voice in there and showing very tangibly how this affects folks in rural areas. Senator Wicker is right next door in Mississippi. He would resonate with this. So you kind of really build that narrative around what does this mean for the folks in the South and the folks in disadvantaged communities? What does it mean for educational attainment? It's not great in Louisiana, right? It's not where it needs to be. So what would this mean actually to getting the broadband? And then the third point would be about the economic development piece of building out from the traditional ag focus, again, keeping it strong, growing it, but then building it out into other technology areas, economic development that really links to the strengths of other communities. And that, again, provides this connectivity to where folks can see the value proposition of how LSU is helping them. So I'm all about the big statistics. I think they're very, very important, but it's very, very difficult in a lot of cases for people to make meaning out of those for the individual sort of challenges they face in their lives. And I think we could do a lot better at that. We have the stories to tell. We have the work to be shown. We just need to figure out how to do it. So communication is really, really important.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question that follows on the communication that goes in a little different direction again? It's a rather philosophical question. When you speak to the legislature or to students or parents or to faculty, how will you answer the question, what is college for? What is it for? What does it do?
Right.
How do you answer that in a way that speaks to people?
College used to be a public good. It used to be something that was just undeniably a public good. Now it's much more seen as, okay, you want to have, improved lifelong earnings and things like that, then you go to college, you pay for college and so on. So there's been a complete shift, I would say. I think it certainly is about helping people have gainful employment their whole career, their whole life, helping prepare them for jobs, helping prepare them for careers. And it's not like, okay, I start here and I go 40 years and I end there. The pathways are like this now. So we have to help people, certainly LSU is doing this, help people understand that it's not, I get a degree and I do that the rest of my life. How do I weed myself in and out? How do I get upskilling, reskilling on different pathways and so on? So that's part of it. The other thing is, I think very, very importantly, as I mentioned earlier, maybe I didn't hear, to be civically engaged, very responsible citizens in our democracy, in our democratic republic. That's very, very important. And, universities are really, I think, one of the last places, if not the last place, where we can really confront very difficult, divisive issues. We can do it with civility, with respect. We can bring our intellectual resources to the table. We can debate with facts. Sometimes those debates get very emotional, but we say, okay, that's fine. We are human beings. We are emotional creatures. But when we debate and think about this, we really are gearing ourselves toward finding an endpoint solution. That's what we ought to be doing. We lock arms and we say we're all part of the family. We're all part of the LSU family. But we have to confront these difficult things, and we need to do it in a way that we are fundamentally respectful of one another. We have a culture at this institution. We don't harass. We don't malign people. We respect them, even though we vehemently disagree with them, but we'll go out and have a beer afterwards. That's the kind of culture I think we want. And I think a lot of institutions seek that. I'm not sure how many really have it. I think at LSU, I've seen a very family-oriented spirit here. And a lot of times I think people are misinformed. They don't understand, or they lack the context. And that's natural, right? So it's kind of on us to say, rather than just jumping into some conversation where we say, okay, what is the value of an education? What does it cost? Step back and say, okay, let's talk about, why do we even have universities to begin with? I mean, why are they necessary? Can't we just do it all on, screw the residential, forget the residential learning, let's just do it all on. I mean, and kind of put ourselves in the catbird seat and ask the tough questions. When a legislator asks, so where did you go to college? What was your experience? Well, I had a very horrible experience. Okay, well, that's an interesting starting point. So you sort of understand the boundary condition of the conversation. So I think when people have those dispositions, they ask those kinds of questions, it's important to understand where they're coming from, because everybody has a different trajectory in their life. And some people's opinions are formed in very different ways than what my opinions have been formed. And I want to learn from them. I'm fascinated by that. And so rather than just jumping to a quick answer, I think it's good to have a conversation. And that's why I avoid social media and things like that myself. Social media is very, very important, but I like to have a dialogue with people because I can't learn from people if it's a monologue. I really want to have a conversation and not going to convince them of anything in particular. If you do that, you're like, I'm going to start this conversation in my mind saying, you know what, you're wrong. Well, nobody likes to be treated that way. So we say, I'm in an academic environment. My goal here is to learn. And so when you talk to legislators, you say, this is an environment where we do those kinds of things. We debate with civility and stuff. We try to come to answers based upon facts. Say, how do you all do it in the legislature? Government doesn't work that way a lot of times. And we're one of the last hopes, I think, of making sure that we can be that source of inspiration, that source of guiding light to do those kinds of things in a thoughtful, respectful way. And I'm not in any way saying anything about the Louisiana legislature or anything like that. I'm just saying in general, I think that's oftentimes the case because we live in such a polarized world right now. And it's not going to come together on its own.
We also live in a very provincial world here, and I hope you would also endorse world openness and fair amount of curiosity as part of what college.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you'll see it in my online course. The opening line is curiosity. It's that word curiosity. And Albert Einstein said, if we do what we're doing, we call it research or scholarship. It's we do know how we're doing it. But to your earlier point, and it's a question I didn't answer, research doesn't have to have an end to it. We're curious creatures by nature. Kids take a stick and poke a bug with it when they're 3 years old. They have no idea what they're doing. They're just curious about what is this thing, And I think over time, a lot of times we sort of take that innate curiosity and we sort of stuff the butterfly back into the cocoon. With a graduate student and a faculty member, well, you can do this, you can pursue this thing, you can get this grant, but you got to check all these boxes. Well, how about just unfettered creative thinking of being a part of who we are? And this is where I love the arts and the fine arts and humanities, because it brings forth that creativity for the sake of that. A painting isn't just a creative endeavor. It tells a history. It tells a story about a particular point in time or a particular viewpoint of the world. And that's extraordinary. And a lot of people don't quite understand that about the arts, So the contributions to our humanity are fundamentally important. And they're valued just as much as somebody creating a new device to go out and be patented at the market.
Thank you. We have time for only a couple more, and I know Patricia wants to ask, and then Isaiah. But let's hear first from Patricia.
Thank you very much. I have been listening, and quite honestly, I'm very pleased to see your appreciation for science, for questioning, for curiosity, and for academic endeavors. If you were to be selected for this post, would you give the research enterprise a balanced attention as it compares to the emphasis on athletics of prior leaders?
Oh, yes. I mean, research is what I've done my whole career, and it's incredibly important. So absolutely the case. Athletics, of course, it takes a lot of time. There's a lot of challenge to it. There's a lot of complexity to it, I would say. But the academic and the research parts of the university are why we are here. And athletics is a wonderful addition that is core to many institutions. I love collegiate athletics. I think it's got a very, very important role to play. But it has to be one of the components that we have. We had a president at the University of Oklahoma many years ago wrote a book, and one of the quotes in there was, "We want to have a university, an academic and research enterprise that our football team can be proud of," because we're, of course, a big football school. And I've never forgotten that. And so absolutely the case. It's critical to the nation. It's what I spent, 2 years at the White House working on, 12 years on the National Science Board. Critically important. But I also love athletics. So there's room for everyone in the LSU family, and there are no unimportant parts.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I had another question. But
Yeah.
something you brought up earlier really caught my attention. You talked about projecting 25 years into the future. To me, that seems impossible. I mean, for example, 4 years ago, we would never have predicted pandemic,
Right.
unemployment. I mean, the same thing goes for a university. There are so
Yeah.
many factors that would come about and determine what the university looks like 25 years in the future that you can't know. How do you expect to be able to project 25 years in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question and a very, very legitimate question. I think the answer to that in my mind is that when we talk about a 25 or 30-year time horizon, we're looking for this kind of call it a broad arc of where we see things going to the best that we can see them. Not that there's going to be a pandemic, not that there's going to be a war. Those are very disruptive things. The eruption of Mount Pinatubo. I mean, those kinds of things are singular events. But I think we do have a sense beyond just a few years of where the demographic trends are in this country. That's certainly important for diversity. And you don't see that same urgency when you only look a few years down the road. I think also in really long-term priorities of competitiveness internationally. For example, in areas like the so-called industries of the future, artificial intelligence and quantum. These are disruptors that are going to be changing fundamentally how we do a lot of things. And quantum, we're not going to see real practical quantum computers for many years yet. So when that happens, then we're talking about substantial things happening beyond that. That's going to change entire fields. So I'm not talking about the details, and so I'm glad you asked this question. It's more, what are the broad strokes of things that we need to be thinking about and potentially aligning ourselves to, but not only being reactive, but being the drivers. We ought to be a driver of some of those big things. Coast of the environment, right? That's a pretty obvious one. How can we help drive the conversation, not just be passive recipients of what say the federal government says are going to be the priorities, but we actually help play a very substantial role in driving what those priorities are. So it's not the details. It's sort of you squint your eyes and you see the blurry things, but within that is a detail. Of course, out 5 or 10 years, you have a lot more detail. And then beyond that, you're talking about these sort of broader kinds of things. I don't know if that helps kind of clarify. It's a little bit difficult to even for me to conceptualize, but that's kind of what I'm talking about, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. Eric, also you had your hand up.
Yes, I had my hand up because to follow this discussion, you say LSU should not be one of many, but something that we turn for inspiration.
Right.
What should be LSU in your eyes? What should LSU carve as something that people want to go for inspiration? Either, the academic people or the researchers or the students?
It's a great question, and it's part of what I would say. I want to have a conversation, but I don't want to punt. So let me say that one thing as I sit here right now and with all candor that, I know what I know about the institution, and I know enough that when I've gone to different places like the White House, you get a completely different view when you're on the inside. But I would say right now, one of the really grand things would be to have LSU be the nation's leading comprehensive from K-12 to doctoral program system that is leading the way in education and research, and also frankly sports. But that sounds, it's a nebulous kind of a thing, but I don't know of, correct me if I'm wrong here, I don't know of other systems that really have the totality of what LSU has. And frankly, even if they do, who cares, right? This is Louisiana. We do things differently here in the South. We have a different work ethic. We have a different orientation. We have a different kind of culture here. And nothing would stop us except ourselves from attaining the goal of saying, we're going to take that uniqueness. We're going to become the role model, the singular role model, which encompasses research, it encompasses academics, diversity, everything. When you look at LSU, that's what you think of. LSU, oh yeah, LSU is that. That's exactly what you think of. People, I'll tell you what, OU, they do think of football, but when they see OU, what do they think of? They think of weather or weather enterprise. They have no idea what that means. They say, oh, you're with the Weather Service or whatever. They don't know that, there's all different pieces, but it's a cool thing because they say, oh yeah, you have that weather thing down there. That took us a few decades to make happen, but I think here we're, that happened over a period of a long time, and it happened a while ago, but for LSU, I think it can be much more profoundly impacted across the entire system. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's the sort of thing that I think is a realizable aspirational goal, but it's not something you can do in 5 or 10 years. That kind of thing really requires that 30-year look and thinking about investments, thinking about alignments, thinking about all sorts of things. If that's really your goal, then a lot of decisions you make in the next few years could help you, just like we said with faculty, where is this grant going to be on your trajectory of your 30 or 40-year career? And they may not be able to completely say, but they see, I never thought about that. So at least you've got to start thinking about it. And that's the first step, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
Nancy, maybe the last question.
I've heard so many things, but I spell STEM E. I mean, of course I do. I spell STEM with A.
With an A, yeah.
Including the R.
Right.
And because I think arts and science are both gay things. They're driven by curiosity. And there's Sue can talk more about this, but there's Boglin Institute where faculty have come to get philosophers, oceanographers.
Yeah.
And I spoke about uncertainty in arts and sciences work. And I think that's great because that's how people learn how other people
right.
and create
right.
and do wonderful things. How can this be instituted at the undergraduate at LSU? So students have more exposure to many different kinds of this.
Right. We talked about that this morning, and one could create a kind of a undergraduate general ed requirements that basically are an entire degree program because everybody kind of wants their favorite thing to be in the gen ed curriculum. I think the one thing that we can do that's most important is to encourage students to think outside of their own sort of narrow interests. Okay, I want to be an electrical engineer. Well, you ought to take a course in art history and world literature, even if it's not required, because if you don't do it now, you're never going to do it. You're never going to have the opportunity. And if you do it now, you're going to have an appreciation when you leave school, you get into your career of, I want to keep connected to that. You kind of develop a love for it and appreciation for it. And so I think one of the things we can do in advising and career counseling and things like that is to say, don't specialize too early. Don't start to focus so early that you're missing the opportunity at this extremely unique environment where there's all these different things that you could dip your toe in the water and experience. Don't just come and take the courses in your own little narrow piece of the world and miss all this other stuff. And some people simply won't get that, but you really try to encourage them to do it. So I think that's one way you can do it at the undergraduate level. The other thing, of course, is to get people interacting with one another. I've worked a lot with psychologists. I've worked with social scientists. And it took us a while to learn our different vocabularies. I would use the word model, they would use the word model, and we talked about completely different things. We were going like this all the time. But as we did that and we really kind of got to know each other in our scholarly areas, it was the most intellectually exhilarating thing I'd ever experienced. So these multiple disciplinary collisions and interactions that you have, where you see people approach problems in a very different way intellectually and cognitively than you do, it really enhances your own abilities. And now I think about a problem different because I've worked with the political scientists and social science. It's not like I'm hypothesis driven. I just think of this and I think immediately of other dimensions of science that are of social science that come in that I never would have thought of. So you have to expose yourself to that. And that's what we really need to encourage students to do. Formal requirements, you could do that, but I think that becomes very hard to do, in a kind of demanding way.
Our daughter.
Oh, really? Yeah, okay. Gotcha.
Okay, so I think we are reaching the end time. Thank you so much for
Thank you, Gabby. Thank you all. Thank you all for spending so much of your day here. And I know you're doing this again tomorrow and you did it yesterday. So that means a great deal to you. Took a huge chunk out of your day at a very busy time of year. You're also accommodating and hospitable and gracious, and you're doing really great things here at LSU. And I think it's easy to come in and say we could go to the next level. I know how difficult it is to grow research, but I think there are some things that one could do by focusing and so on. And everybody I've talked to so far says, yes, we really could do more. And it's not to achieve some arbitrary number, it's to contribute more in the scholarly areas, whatever those areas are, across the entire comprehensive university, which is why I am interested in this position versus going to some place that has a very narrow focus. So anyway.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you
You
very
bet.
much.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.